This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
I taught about 4 hours of academics to some Belgians this morning, so if I slur my speech, it's because I've used all my words already
do you
today.
Speak Belgianese?
No.
No.
In fact, I had to tell them a few times hey, dude, you got to slow that one down for me because their English is accented and very choppy. And the guys, the foreign dudes who have been here, the Italians, the Norwegians, Dutch, Danish, all those people, I've gotten used to them. I've been around them for 6 years, and I've gotten very used to their accents and how they enunciate certain words. But the Belgians are brand new. They've only been here a month or two.
Okay.
And so it's going to take me a while to break that code. But yeah. So we'll start with a little exercise before we reveal what we're talking about today. Okay. And I'm just going to say your hair is stupid and nobody wears V-neck t-shirts anymore. Get with the program here. And I don't like those headphones. You should probably swap those out. What's that a great example of?
That's a great example of non-constructive feedback.
Oh, so how can we talk about and how can we turn that into valid? Oh, okay. Copy.
No, but that's a great point, right? Because
today
we're going to talk about constructive criticism or constructive feedback.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times Roscoe and I are asked for this from people. And so we thought it might be worthwhile to discuss both sides of it. We've talked a lot about how to receive feedback on the podcast in the past. But I don't think we've really ever talked about how to provide constructive criticism,
how to
provide
give it,
constructive feedback.
Yeah.
And, like in your example brother, it's, well, I was just going to say in what you just did right there, if we go back and rewind the tapes, whatever, if I remember correctly, all your statements were you statements, like no, or they were absolute statements, right? Nobody wears V-neck t-shirts anymore. You look stupid. Your hair looks stupid, and it's right. So anytime you're speaking in those, if you speak in absolutes or you use a lot of you statements when you're providing feedback to somebody, you're immediately going to put somebody on the defensive. And once they go on the defensive, they're not listening to a thing you say. They're formulating in their mind at that point what their response is going to be, how they're going to get back, right?
That's right.
So
there's a defensive wall that gets put up that and you may see it with a coworker, you may see it with a spouse. And one thing that you didn't mention that I highlighted there was I used a lot of opinions in there instead of something that may be rooted in fact or quantifiable in some way. Now, in the military, there are regulations that dictate what your haircut should look like. And I can tell you, your hair is out of regulations. You need to go get a haircut. That's a you statement, but it's still valid. It's still quantifiable. I can put a ruler next to your ear and tell you whether or not your hair's out of regs. But to say that nobody wears V-neck t-shirts anymore, that's kind of like a Trumpian statement. It's like, oh, it's the best. We did it. It was the best. It's the best V-neck ever. And I wore it better than anybody. Well, okay. Those are all opinions. And not everybody thinks like that. So let's see if we can quantify some of that stuff. If you're going to a business casual dinner, probably don't want to wear your V-neck t-shirt. But if you're sitting in your hotel room doing a podcast, who gives a shit?
This is what I'm comfortable in. So, So where do you want to start with? Do you want to start with receiving or like some good ideas or ways to provide that constructive feedback?
Well, I'm going to keep this G-rated and just say, let's find another way to phrase that next time. But we've talked a lot about We've talked a lot about receiving feedback. And, I think probably the biggest thing with, at least from this is just my point of view, and I don't know where this is written, but the biggest thing when receiving feedback is you have to be a little bit humble about it, right? You have to go into that,
Yeah.
whatever that session may be it formal or informal, and you have to kind of know, like, I'm probably going to get some things highlighted that I'm not going to be either proud of or comfortable with, but if it's done right, this is going to make me better, right? And with a little bit of humility, I think you open up that door to receive that a little bit more. That doesn't mean it's not going to sting, and that doesn't mean that it's not going to be very critical. You can give critical feedback, but still have it constructive, if I'm saying that right. You know what I mean? You can be very
Well,
critical
I
of
think,
somebody's performance as long as it's rooted in something that's measurable and intended to make them better, and not like an ad hominem attack about your mom or whatever.
yeah, exactly. So let's talk first then about just how to receive it, right? Because these are things that we've mentioned on the podcast before, but I don't know if we've actually kind of distilled it down to this level of granularity before. And it goes back to what you were just saying, just to piggyback on what you were saying. Like, I think the first step to that is, if you are receiving feedback, the best thing you can do to start is just listen actively and don't interrupt. Like, let them get, the person that's providing you that feedback, let them get out whatever it is that they need to say. Don't start
Yeah.
piling in on the or the excuses, or starting to get defensive. Just take a deep breath, sit back, and go into receive mode, right? And listen and see what they're saying, and try to focus on the content of what they're saying and not necessarily the delivery, because we'll get into this when we talk about how to provide it. But you may be getting feedback from somebody who may not be very good at giving it, like saying, your earphones are outdated and your V-neck t-shirt looks like shit and your haircut sucks. So
those are all valid statements, by the way.
thank you. So try to focus on the content. And then if you don't understand if you don't understand what they're saying to a certain degree, or maybe what exactly they're getting at, because their delivery may not be that great either, when they're done, don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. Don't be afraid to go, well, I just want to make sure I understand you correctly. Are you saying that because of, X, Y, and Z is happening? Or just try to ask those clarifying questions so you can really get to the nitty gritty of what they're getting after.
Yeah. I think there's there's something in there that's missing too. And you almost got there, but it was, when you go into this session, it may be a largely one-sided conversation in the beginning. And in order to not miss something, bring something to write with, man. Bring something to write with, bring something to write on. And I still, to this day, man, I'll be sitting there running debriefs with young kids, and at the end or at a break or whatever, I might go tell the IP, I'm like, where the fuck are their notebooks, dude? Every B course wingman on the planet needs a notebook to write shit down. And a few of them will say, well, I take notes on the back of my lineup card and then I'll go and transcribe it in my notebook. Okay. All right. I'll give you a pass on that one. And then there's other kids that I see sitting there in an hour-long debrief where it's 100% focused on you and you getting better, right? And not a single note taken. And they just sit there and nod, yes, no, I don't know, and they get through it. Well, I need a person who's going to engage, like you said. It needs to be you need to actively listen to this. I need to see you taking notes and then asking me questions on the shit that you just took down. I don't need you interrupting me every 30 seconds, especially if I'm flowing or trying to make a really good point, right? So just jot down a note as a memory jogger, and when that segment is over, then let's clarify. Let's ask some questions around that. Raise your hand, say, hey, I got a question, and get into it.
Yeah, well, you remember in the 425th, anybody that was in an upgrade, what was the expectation? We expected them to have a notebook.
Have a notebook, man. Those little green fucking
notebook, so that they could take notes they could learn.
I've got stacks of those things on my bookcase over here, man. From my career, everywhere I went, I had something to write with and something to write on. I still do it.
Yeah. 100% agree. Right, being because the other thing about taking notes or just having something to write on too, like if you have questions, maybe you're getting feedback and they're going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes. Well, by the time you get to the end of the 15 minutes, you may forget the question that you had at minute 130, so
Yeah,
it
exactly.
lets you
That's
write
the
down
whole
the
point.
questions you may
Yeah.
have as well as what they're getting at, or what the feedback is for you.
Yeah.
The other thing that's important though in those scenarios too is don't become defensive, right? Don't take it as criticism necessarily as you as a person. It should be more focused on your behavior
On your performance.
or your
Yeah.
performance. Um,
Yeah.
so try not to take it personally, and don't get defensive, and definitely don't start making excuses, right? Because if you're in a position
Yeah.
where you've got a supervisor and they're trying to provide you feedback, and maybe they're not that good at it, if you start making excuses for all these things that they're trying to highlight to you because they're actually trying to help you get better, what kind of signal is that going to send to them?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That becomes very difficult. That becomes very difficult when it's either when it's informal feedback and or it is unscheduled impromptu feedback. Right? Because I think just as a human being, our natural reaction is to go, "What the fuck, dude?" and put that
Yeah.
defensive wall up,
Yeah.
So, somebody rolls over to your office and just starts telling you everything that you fucked up over the last week. Yeah, that's going to sting a little bit. Nobody likes to be told they're effed up, and nobody likes to be told they're wrong, and nobody likes to be told that all these things you could have done them a lot better.
Yeah.
And so that unsolicited feedback, that blindsided feedback that comes kind of out of nowhere, I think is maybe a little bit more difficult to deal with in that moment than, okay, I got to go to the boss's office tomorrow morning at 8 for my feedback session.
Agreed.
That way, this evening I can kind of prepare myself and I can get my pen and my paper and maybe I write down some questions I need to ask him or whatever. But you kind of get yourself in that mental space beforehand versus, kind of getting jumped or blindsided.
Yeah. And then the next piece of this is I think the piece that we've probably spoken about on the podcast the most, which is take some time to reflect on the feedback, but also understand the source, right? So if the source is valid, then yeah, dude, reflect on that and go, man, maybe I was because guess what? Here's the bottom line, you guys, is we all have blind spots. We all have things that we may not realize that we're not very good at or that we could be better at. We may think we're doing okay, and we all have blind spots. I remember I had a squadron commander one time when I was a flight commander, and he had us rack and stack everybody in the squadron. And, primarily in a fighter squadron, that rack and stack is based on performance in the jet. But he had all the flight commanders sit down with these guys, and we talked about performance in the jet. We talked about basic officership, and then we talked about performance in their additional duties. So we kind of broke it down into 3 different things, right? Because, there's a lot of guys who may be really good in the jet and are shitty fucking officers, or suck as the chief of scheduling or the chief of mobility or, drop the ball as a pro Joe. They just don't have the organizational skills, whatever the case may be. Like they can get organized around the brief and they're really good at execution and they understand tactics and all that stuff, but they lack in some of these other areas. And then you've got the flip side of it, right? You've got what we would call managers in the Air Force who are, I wanted to say decent officers. They're probably pretty good officers and they're really good at organizing the minutia and the stuff that we tend not to focus on in squadrons, but they're not that great in the jet. And so we all have these blind spots in ways that we can improve and kind of make ourselves a more well-rounded asset to the team or to the organization and things like that. And so just my point in all that is take time to reflect on that feedback. Consider how you can apply it constructively if it applies to you. And going back to asking questions and getting clarity, ask for some specific examples if you need to. And what's important about this, because the one thing that I learned, which was a great leadership lesson for me as a captain in the Air Force, when our squadron commander had us do this with all the people in our flight, was when you have those difficult conversations with people, not always difficult, but sometimes difficult, But when you have conversations with people where you go, hey, dude, here's a couple of things, here's what you're crushing, and here's a couple of things that you might want to think about working on, right? You put them in play to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
You've told them as a leader, you've told them as a supervisor or whatever, hey, here's some things that I need you to work on. The ball's in their court, and they're going to do one or two things. They're either going to step up and fix it and work on it, or they're not. And it becomes very clear to leadership in short order which one of those two things it is. And then you know if they're the kind of cat that is you need to push forward, is going to be ready for the next project officer opportunity or the next level up or not. But at least they can't go 6 months later. Well, I didn't know I wasn't any good at this. I didn't know I wasn't. You guys thought I wasn't capable. This was a weak spot for me, right? So you put them in play, and that's in essence, I think, most of the time what leadership is trying to do when they give you feedback.
In the Air Force, we benefited from a very formal process, though. We had initial feedbacks, we had midterm feedbacks, and we had annual feedbacks, and all of those were scheduled. And then, of course, there was informal feedbacks like a debrief or, just a BS session in the bar or something like that. Or, maybe you just got done with some big project that you were working on and your flight commander or the boss pulls you aside and says, hey man, you knocked that out of the park. Or maybe it's the opposite of that. Here's some things you could have done better, kind of stuff, just a hallway conversation. But I think that formal process was something we benefited from. What about in a workplace where maybe that's not the case? The importance of an initial feedback, I think, is, you kind of have to set the expectations. Like, these are the standards. This is what we expect you to meet. This is how we expect you to conduct yourself. But I think that midterm feedback is just as important from the performer's point of view, right? And in a workplace that maybe doesn't have that, like the company that I work for now, we don't do midterm feedbacks. I get an annual review and that's it. And it's usually ball wash and probably a pre-canned statement that says he's doing great at his job. Check, done. All right. Well, that's not really critical feedback. That's not constructive criticism on, you could do this better. You could improve your communication skills. Here's some examples of when you told me to fuck off, and maybe next time don't use those words, that kind of stuff. But as the person who's doing the things, right? If you're in an environment that doesn't have a structured feedback system like that, the onus is on you to request the feedback. And I don't mean go into your boss's office every day and go, hey boss, how am I doing today? No, give it a few months, quarterly or semi-annually, something like that. Is it semi-annually or biannually? Semi-annual is twice a year. Ask for that feedback, and he may still, your boss may still just have a canned answer for you. But if you say, hey boss, like really think about it. Like, I really want to get better at this. I really want to take another step or whatever, and tell me the things that I can really work on to get me there, to get me in competition for that upgrade, or get me in competition for that promotion that I've been wanting, or something like that. And I bet you would be surprised if you don't have a super lazy manager. I bet you they'll take 5 minutes and they'll help you out.
Yeah, I bet you they will too. I would wonder too, Roscoe, in your position, because you're detached from your leadership geographically, if you don't get a lot of informal feedback from the guys that you work with, and maybe not.
Well, we do, and
but also maybe
it's the water cooler feedback. Yeah. It is. But it's, dude, it's the same as being in a fighter squadron though. It's instant justice, and it's called instant justice for a reason. It's instant and it is just. If you screw something up, dude, your pros are going to let you know really quick, because the idea behind it is the team is only as strong as the weakest link, right? And we need everybody to be at a level. And if you start slipping, you're either going to get back to that level or you're going to get kicked off the team. That's really the bottom line when you're dealing with elite teams, man. Yeah. If you're the NASCAR tire changer who can't fucking put the lug wrench on the thing, you're not going to be that tire changer for very long. Yeah. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along with reflecting on the feedback that you receive, I think it's important to this kind of goes along with it, but just keep an open mind and be willing to change, because some of it may be valid, right? And some of it may be a blind spot that is brought up to your attention that you need to develop some skills around. And
Yeah.
now you can actually go at attacking and getting better at those skills. And that goes into some of the things that we've talked about before too, like maybe there's a skill that you don't have that you're bad at, but there's somebody else that's really good at it. Well, partner up with that person and learn from them. Find
Yeah.
a mentor. But
Yeah, I was just talking about that in the pregame here about how I'm seeking out people who they've been there and they've done that, and they've read these things and they've done the things, and call them and ask them and pick their brains and get that information from them and try new things.
Yeah. And then I think something that's valid to do too, especially in the civilian sector, is when you do receive feedback, once you've had some time to kind of digest it and think about it and come up with a plan about how maybe you want to attack that feedback that you've gotten, I think it's worthwhile to go back to the person that provided that feedback to you, whether it's a manager or whoever, and go, hey, I really appreciate the feedback that you gave me, and here's what I'm doing to try to fix it. Here's what I'm doing to attack that, and let them know that like you took it seriously, and that you're working towards fixing whatever those things were that they felt like you needed to improve upon.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way a good foot to put forward, because it shows your commitment to improvement. It shows your commitment
Show some
to
initiative.
right. It shows initiative and your desire to receive and your ability to take feedback. So,
yeah. And that doesn't make it any easier, I don't think, to receive.
It's a humbling process.
I'll say negative feedback, but it's not I dealt with this when I was coaching football, man, and I'm dealing with a bunch of pubescent and prepubescent boys, 12 and 13-year-olds out there. Half of them are getting their period, the other half are waiting on it. Their egos and their pride are very fragile. I had a kid start crying one time because I told him to tie his shoes. Like, this is what I'm dealing with, right? So I had to measure my words very carefully. But one day I told him, I said, dudes, like, think about it like this, all right? If we came out here to the football field and I told you how awesome you are every day, you're not going to get any better.
Yeah.
Because you're in your mind, you're going to be thinking, man, I'm awesome. The coach keeps telling me I'm awesome and everything I do is awesome. But if I tell you the little things that you can do better and the little things that you're screwing up, then that's going to make you work on those. And guess what that's going to do? It's going to make you even more awesome, man. I mean, like, look at our record. We're undefeated. We're doing good, but we can always do a little bit better. You hear the great coaches talk about this. Nick Saban would be up 40 points in the fourth quarter with 2 minutes left in the ball game with his threes on the field, and he's turning red like Yosemite Sam out there coaching these kids up. Like, we can always be getting better at something.
Yeah, exactly. You can always be improving a skill. You can always be improving some aspect of yourself. So take it for what it's worth. Try to apply it where you can. But I think it's good to circle back too and go, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Like, here's how I'm trying to attack this.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said, like in a position where I'm at, and probably you as well, by the time you get to where we're at in our careers, like, my boss is in Oklahoma City, right? And I don't talk to him every day. I don't see him every day. I don't talk to him. And we have an understanding that as long as I'm not calling him and he's not calling me, the assumption is everything is good, right? When we have issues, when I have questions or when he has questions, we'll phone each other, we'll text each other, and we'll iron it out, and occasionally there's come up, somebody's feathers got ruffled here or there, and we just have a grown man conversation. We work it out. And, every now and then my boss will ask me, hey, Roscoe, what can I do better as a manager? What can I do better to support you guys and get you the things that you need? And I think that's huge, man,
huge.
from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah.
Well, but that makes it a two-way conversation now, and it's, I think you gain so much credibility as a leader when you would stand up in the debrief and you would own your mistakes and speak it out in front of the room. And then ask them at the end, like, guys, hey, I just sat here and I debriefed you for an hour, but do you have anything for me? Like, what did you notice on my tapes that I didn't catch?
Yeah.
Little things like that build a giant amount of credibility for you.
Yeah, well, like when we were in the fighter squadron, man, and I was instructing somebody at the end of the debrief, I would always ask, what can I do better as an IP? Right? Like, what are the because
Yeah.
guess what? I can always improve too. Even though I'm, the patch, I'm the guy that's supposed to know all this stuff and be able to do all this stuff at a high level. There's always things I can improve on, you know? So
Yeah.
what can I do better as an IP? Those are good questions to ask, right?
Well, it's usually for guys like us who've been doing it for a long time, it's usually evident by the debrief points or the questions that the student has, right? If he starts having a lot of questions that you remember that you briefed, you clearly didn't brief him well enough,
Yeah.
or brief him in a way that he was able to hang on to or remember or whatever. So I would kind of silently take that back and go, dude, if he just had 6 questions about my shot doctrine for today, I clearly need to iron that out a little bit better and brief
Yeah.
that a little bit better next time.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't doing him. I was setting him up for failure by not being good at what I do.
Well, and
Right. So I can
sometimes,
take that back and I can work on that.
yeah, and sometimes knowing your audience helps too, right? Like some people are visual learners, some people are auditory, and so a lot of
Oh,
times
that's
with
huge.
the
Yeah.
students, because a lot of times when I would pre-brief the guys, I would ask them, are you a visual learner or are you an auditory learner? Because if they were visual, man, I would just draw on the board to try to get them to understand what it was we were trying to do and why we're doing the things that we're doing and the flow decisions and how
Yeah.
all of it works, but if they're auditory, then we can just have that conversation. Then if I need to highlight something, I can do it on the board. So sometimes understanding your audience, I think, helps you a lot in conveying that information as well.
For the record, Cass, I learn best when you draw strip comics and sing like Taylor Swift. So from now on, when you're
Yeah,
trying to teach me something, I'm going to need that from you.
I'm not teaching you
So
anymore. I don't know that I've ever taught you. So there you go. All right. Should we go? Should
yeah.
we go to? Should we switch gears to how to give constructive criticism
Yeah.
or feedback?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
you've been doing this
So
lately.
that was all on the person. You're the guy
Receiving.
sitting in the chair taking the notes, receiving the feedback. So what if you're the dude on the other side of the table? How does that
Yeah.
change?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it doesn't change, but now you're responsible for the delivery of that feedback. First of all, you have to construct it. You have to come up with it and identify those things that you want to give this kid feedback on. And maybe they're apparent, maybe they're not. Maybe it warrants discussion so that you can kind of scratch the surface a little bit and see if you can dig down into the root of actually why it is he's making this error or why it is he screwed this one thing up. But I got a decent example, and I'm going to keep names out of this because this is something I still think about periodically. But I had an NCO that worked for me one time, and we were deployed, and he was a critical member of the team, right? And I had bestowed upon him a fairly large amount of responsibility in his role and asked him to do some very pointed things for me. And he failed to do those things over and over and over again. And I sat there racking my brain over why is this guy not doing this? It's not that he's incompetent. He's a smart guy, right? It's not that he hasn't been trained. In many accounts, I had trained him myself. How much of that he retained, we can discuss that a little bit later. But I remember calling my DO up at Bagram, and he was a reserve Viper dude. And I said, hey, man, I'm having this issue with this guy. What do you think? And he goes, well, first of all, I'm going to say you're an officer in the Air Force. I respect your judgment. And then I'm going to ask you what's really going on. And he helped me dig down into it a little bit. Well, it came, I pulled the guy aside and I gave him some informal feedback. And I just said, hey, man, here's the deal. This is the perception. You tell me what reality is. Let's meet in the middle and let's figure this out. Right. And he, my first question was, is anything going on back home? Because we're deployed. Is anything going on back home? You having a problem with mom and the kids, anything like that? And he goes, no, everything's good. Okay. Are you stressed? Like, are you nervous about being in a war zone? Like something, give me something here. Right. And everything was like, nope, I'm good. Mama's good. All this. Okay. So you're just fucking all this stuff up then. Right. You're either lazy enough that you don't want to do it, or you're incompetent and you can't do it. So that's kind of what I was left with. Now give him a couple more weeks and still the same things over and over and over again. It seemed like task after task, he was just falling on his face. He was either not doing it or he was screwing it up. He's like half-assing it, whatever. So I brought him in for a formal feedback. Now, granted, remember that this is after he, I'd been his supervisor for, I don't know, probably 9 months at this point. So he's worked for me for a long time. He knows the way I operate. I know him. He knows me. I'd given him informal feedback on a lot of occasions, and now I bring him in for his formal feedback before I have to write his EPR here in a few months. And I sat him down on the thing, and I asked him again, is everything good back home? Everything good here? And he was all smiles, like everything's good. I was like, all right, dude, sit back and take some notes, because this is going to sting a little bit.
Yeah.
And I let him have it. And I just started listing out the stuff, man. I started listing it out for him, and I could see him just kind of wither into the chair as I started giving him this, just point after point after point of all these things that you've screwed up, man. And unfortunately for him, he didn't have an answer. Not a one mistake Air Force. So I gave him his midterm feedback. Now he knows. Now I have put it out for him in black and white, right? It's in black and white. This is what your performance has been up to this date. These are my expectations of you moving forward. Okay. And I give him about another month, and it's the same stuff. And that guy ends up getting sent home from the AOR, and he probably never got promoted again after his next performance review. So I told that really long story to highlight a couple of things. One, there was a history there of setting expectations. Two, there was informal feedback that was just kind of at a bro level, man. Just put your arm around the guy. Hey, man, what's going on? Tell me about mom and the kids. Tell me what's going on at home. What are you doing in your downtime? Are you watching movies? Are you reading books? Are you staring at the ceiling, thinking about putting your 9 mil in your throat, whatever? And then there was the formal feedback where you clearly establish a line.
Yeah.
And it's up to him now to either walk that line or not.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the process that I used with that one.
No, that's good, man. And I mean, I think the important part because like we were talking about earlier at the beginning, you don't want to get personal with it. Like if you're going to provide feedback to somebody, focus on the behaviors or the actions, that's what you want to focus on. You want to provide, as I'm sure you did in that formal feedback, you probably gave him some very specific, concrete examples of where he was falling short and what needed to be addressed, right? And again, avoid the generalizations like you always or you never, or because that's just going to put people on the defensive, right? Just focus on those actions and behaviors that you see them maybe not meeting the mark or whatever the standard is, and then provide some feedback on how they can get there, right? Like, so this is what which
that's
is
the key, right?
The expectation, right? It's setting the expectation.
Yeah.
Like, dude, my expectation is that this gets done by Friday at noon, or my expectation is that when I give you a tasking that it's completed by within 40, whatever the case may be, whatever that standard is, right?
Yeah.
And then I think it's always important too in situations like this to describe the impact of their action or inaction on the team. Like, this is how you're affecting the team, man.
Yeah.
We're in a war zone,
yeah.
And when I need you to get this stuff done, it's not because I'm an asshole and I want you to do shit that doesn't need to get done. It's because if this doesn't get done, this is how it affects the team. This is how it affects our ability.
Here's the second, third order effects
right?
of
Here's
that.
the second, third order effects and how it affects our ability to get the job done. So I think focusing on those actions and behaviors and not getting into any kind of personal attack, like, oh, and you're ugly and your hair sucks and your V-neck t-shirts and your earplugs suck. Like, that's probably not the route you want to go, even if they're valid. So,
well, no, I remember sitting in, we were flying out of Nellis doing WIC support. And so we're in a WIC debrief one night, and the WUGs are up there doing their best, man. And this one black border patch, dude, he just starts going after this guy and talking bad about his mom and shit. Like, did your mom have any kids that lived and all this shit? And I'm like, whoa, talk about crossing a line, dude. You fucking murdered that shit.
Yeah.
Right. So now, in that story that I gave him very critical feedback. It was not nice. It was very pointed. And me with my resting bitch face, he probably felt the fear of God for a little bit, but it wasn't mean necessarily, but it was very critical. And and like you said, man, we did this every day. in a normal flight debrief, it was, what did you do wrong? Why was it wrong? And here's how to not do it wrong again. Right.
Yeah.
Give me those 3 things and I will make you better. Over time, I can make you better if I can give you those 3 things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, one of the things, and this is actually one of the points that I was going to bring up, is a lot of times some ways to set the table when you're about to give constructive criticism or maybe some harsher feedback is to, begin it with a constructive tone in the sense of highlight the things that they're doing well. So a lot of times when I would
Good, bad, good sandwich.
Yeah, right, the sandwich, right? So a lot of times when I would bust students at the end of the debrief, I would go, look, dude, here's the things that you did really well today. And I want you to keep building on those, right? But here's where we fell short. Here's the areas that you need to improve on.
Yeah.
And then not just here's the areas you need to improve on, but here's how to do it better the next time, right? So that's that sandwich.
Yeah.
There's the things you did well. Here's the things that we need to improve on. And here's how you can get there, right? So,
well, let's go back to the very beginning when I was very critical of your haircut, your headphones, and your V-neck T-shirt. There was no instruction involved in there. There was no, how do you get better next time? That conversation could have been a little bit different. But like, CAS, like not a lot of people are doing comb overs nowadays. Maybe go see a barber. That's
fuck you, take your hat off.
There was some instruction involved in there. So here's how you don't do it wrong again. Get some pomade or something. I don't know. But yeah, I think to really close it up as the person giving that feedback, you have to set that expectation. You have to let them know what the standard is and how do you get there. That's the instruction piece of it. That's the part that's going to make that person better.
You have to offer actionable suggestions for improvement. You can't just say, hey, you need to be better. Okay. Well, how? Like, especially because being better in certain scenarios can be completely subjective based on who you work for to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to provide clear...
that's considering the source.
Yeah. Well, you have to provide clear, achievable steps for how they're going to address whatever you're bringing up, right? Especially if it's complex, you may have to break it down for those people a little bit and go, so here's how we can get to task on this, to kind of set them a path forward on how they can improve. And even discuss, resources that they have that they may not be that they're aware of. Like when you're talking to a guy who's never been a pro Joe before and you've done it a million times and he's sitting there overwhelmed by the task at hand, you go, well, hey, dude, just reach out to your resources at finance, at who's your maintenance POC, who's your supply POC. Like, get in touch with those guys and let them do their work, right? You can figure this out, right? There may be resources that they have.
How about, hey, have you talked to this guy over here? He was just the pro Joe on the last TDY.
Yeah, right.
So maybe he's got some good lessons learned, point them in a direction to where they can go and ask those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think it's really important to go ahead.
Now I was going to say that there was there's a line here or there's a different conversation when you're not necessarily talking about a professional environment. Maybe it's just you and a group of friends that are sitting around, and we talk a lot about the circle of five and your circle, the people you surround yourself with. Well, if you see one of those guys that are, maybe they're being knuckleheads or they're making bad decisions, there's a delicate balance there with how to give that feedback to that individual. Because now you're talking about emotions, now you're talking about relationships, and it's not just that professional, leader subordinate relationship that you're talking about. Like, how do you give feedback to your wife? How do you give feedback to your best bro? Things like that. Yeah, that's different.
I think when you do that, like the important part of that is to be genuine in that feedback and authentic in that feedback, right? But you also want to be respectful and empathetic. We've talked a lot about empathy on the podcast. You want to come to it as a place of support, not a place of attack, if that makes sense, right?
Not using the you statements.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and one of the things that I want to bring up, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring up is because it's good in the professional environment and it's really good in the relational environment, is use I statements. Like, I feel like, or it appears to me that, use I statements. Don't sit there and go
Mhm.
you, because when you do that, you're going to put them on the defensive, man. And if you're talking to your significant other or
Yeah.
something like that, like, well, you always do, don't do that. You can just say, when those things happen, this is how it makes me feel. This is the way I see
Yeah.
it, and I'm not sure if that's the way I should see it or not, but this is what happens for me. And so, can we explore
Yeah.
that? Can you explain that to me? Like, what's the intention behind it? Those types of things, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
it prevents people from getting on that defensive foot right away, and allows you to have that conversation in a more genuine and empathetic environment. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. And I think another way to do that too is just start asking questions, man. And I'm not necessarily talking about leading questions, but if there's a behavior or something out of your buddy, your spouse, your your brother, whatever it is, if there's a behavior that you notice is maybe being destructive or going in a different way, then you can start asking some questions and get them thinking about it from maybe a different point of view.
Yeah.
Um, like when you do this, like how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
What's your decision making behind this? Start asking some of these questions. And what I've actually found decent enough success in this when I can get them to see it like it's their idea. And it's almost like you ask enough questions to where the person goes, "Oh, wait a minute, dude, I'm all fucked up." Like now it's their idea, it's not
Yeah.
yours. And really, once they say that, now you're like, "Oh, dude, well, hey, here's some things that we can do to get going down the right path."
Yeah. I think it's important in those scenarios to frame your questions in ways that are more related to your own observation or experience with whatever the behavior is, if that makes sense. So,
Well, you have to be careful not to use the you statements,
yes,
though.
right. So an example is that is, I've noticed instead of you always, or something to that nature, right? So
Yeah.
stick with those I statements, try to get away from the you statements so that you don't put them on the defensive and they can actually hear what you're trying to say or what you're trying to ask
Well,
about.
carefully crafted statements or questions are, and dude, this takes practice.
It
I
takes a
still
lot of
suck at it. I'm
practice. This
trying to
is a
get better at it.
skill. This is something you got to build.
It is. So if you say, Cass, I've noticed that you say fuck way too much, and then you go fuck you, and then the conversation's over. So there's a different way to phrase that. And Cass, like we're trying to keep the podcast a little more professional.
Yeah.
Maybe we can watch our 4-letter F words,
Because I'm the one that's
in the
swearing all
next
the time,
episode or something.
Roscoe. Yeah.
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 Fuck
Well,
you.
but see, like I would say, in that situation, though, I wouldn't say, I've noticed that I would say, I've noticed that when this happens, this is how it makes me feel, or this is what happens. This is what results from that. I would stay away from that
Yeah.
you statement in that case. But another thing,
Well, that what you just said though, I think that's key though, is you said this is the result of
yeah,
the action,
yeah,
right? And that's providing the data. Like here's the point. Like this is the whole point of this whole thing is this is how you affect the process or how you affect the outcome in some way, how you affect the team, how you affect the scoreboard. So if we can just fix this one little thing over here, then we prevent this whole ripple effect.
yeah. And I wouldn't say you. I would just say, I've noticed that when this happens, it affects the team in this way. And I'd like to prevent that from happening. So how can we fix that? Right? Like that would be a way to do it without using those you statements that may put them on the defensive. But the flip side of that too is like we were talking about with the person who's receiving feedback and you want to listen actively and be open to dialogue. I think you need to be open to that when you give feedback too, right? You need to be open to dialogue and to listen to the questions that they may have, because they may not recognize that they have that blind spot and they may have questions about how to address it, or they may need they may need clarity around what exactly you're getting at because it doesn't make sense to them. So just be prepared for that as well, and try to make those statements again as, well, you always do this and it fucks everything up, right? Like that's probably not the way to go after it. But be open to dialogue.
But in that case though, as the person giving the feedback, now the burden is on you to bring the evidence.
Yes.
And be able to show that.
Well, and that's why
here's the effect of this action.
Yeah, and that's why, like we said before, it's good to have concrete examples when you're working through those things. My fucking stand is, hold on a second. It's good to have those concrete examples, right? Because That's how you avoid, I mean, that's how you address some of those things up front. But again, depending on how fast you talk, the amount of information you're delivering, it may be overwhelming at first for them. And so be open to the fact that they may have some questions because they may be hearing this for the first time.
Dude, we see this. I see this nearly every day in the environment that I work in. In between sets or something, they've got 3 or 4 minutes while the sim is resetting, and the instructor's giving very good feedback about, hey man, here's what happened in that set. Do you agree with me that my perception is accurate? First of all, yeah, that's pretty much what I saw too. Okay, cool. So based on that, then here's 3 or 4 things that we can work on in the next set so that we don't get housed, or maybe we just do it better. We want to win hard. We don't want to just win. We want to win hard. So here's how we get there. But you're talking so fast and you're giving so much feedback. Like the first set on a TI run is going to be terrible for the B courser, right?
Yeah.
So pick 1 or 2 things. Hey man, let's get our commit and our first shots off on time. If we can get our commit down and get our shots off on time on this next run, that's cool. And so set 2, you debrief something a little bit else. All right, so now we're going to do commit on time, we're going to do shots on time, and we're going to do post-shot mechanics on time, whatever that is. All right, and you start building up that way. If you tried to give him the fire hose after set 1 of all the things he messed up, man, he's not even in the cockpit with you. He's somewhere else right now. He's going to shut down after the first or second thing. He's not going to remember what you said, and you're just wasting your breath.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think finally, as a leader or somebody who may be providing feedback, it's important to follow up. It's important to, follow up and see if they're having challenges with implementing the changes you've suggested, so that you can go back to, well, have you thought about this, or, have you considered these other resources, or, Roscoe's really good at this. Maybe you should go talk to him about it. Or like you said, that CAS was the projo on the last deployment a month ago. Maybe you should go talk to him about how this works, right? And then, and I think it's also important that if you have somebody that you provided that feedback to, when you see them making that change, recognize it. Recognize it and give them a little praise around it, man, because that's going to motivate them to keep moving down that path. And you're going to start to build and establish a level of trust between you and that person that's going to make them want to receive that feedback from you down the road.
Yeah.
To receive further feedback from you down the road.
Well, one of the things on the list that I had pulled up over here was constructive criticism should be motivating, right? And on the surface, you can take that or leave it. I think that we benefited from some very critical, direct criticism over our careers that wasn't necessarily meant to be motivating, but in the end, it made us better, and that's motivating.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I will say this though, that I see fairly routinely, the students are sitting there receiving their debrief, receiving their feedback, and occasionally they'll do something all right, or they'll do something good. And when the instructor turns to them, hey man, good job, keep that up. That's really all it takes. And guess what, man? You just recaged that kid into the conversation. Because until that point, he'd been sitting there watching his tapes or watching you, looking for the next thing that he fucks up so that he can have an answer for it. But if you stop and go, hey man, this was really good. Like, you got that guy on time. That was awesome. Continue. All right. Don't let that drop out. You bring that guy back into the conversation now, and you give him a little bit of a pat on the back. God knows we did not do what we did for that many years for the accolades and the pat on the back. All right. That's not why we did it. And in fact, I don't even know if we looked forward to that. When it happened, it felt good though.
Yeah.
Right. It's always nice when your boss or your flight lead compliments you on something that you did well.
Winning is fun.
Most of the time, our standard was so fucking high that the expectation was you do well.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to pat you on the back. It goes back to my football example, right? I'm not going to tell you everything you did great, but an occasional attaboy is not that bad.
No, and it's encouraging, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times, I may have had a student who is struggling on a specific task or a specific phase, and in the pre-brief and all the stuff leading up to executing the sortie, we'd get back in the debrief, and if they had a really good sortie, man, I'd be high-fiving them. and be like, see, dude, you can do this, right? Like, you're capable of this. You did it today. Like, you can do this. You just got to get, you just got to get the flow down. You just got to get disciplined in your execution. Like, if you continue to do these things, you will get there. And so,
do you think that's more important to do that on a guy that had a really good day or a guy that had a really bad day?
well, I think it's important always on a guy that's having a bad day to highlight the things that he still did well, right? Because you don't want to just beat him over the
He's
brow.
going to be beating himself up.
Dude, he's already going to be beating himself up, and he already feels like shit because he busted the sortie, and he's gonna, and especially if it's happening in succession, maybe a guy is struggling in a specific phase and he's busted a ride a couple of different times, or busted a couple of rides for similar things. He's going to start thinking, man, I don't fucking get this. I don't know what I'm, I don't know if I can do this. Right. And so you've got to point out the positive, because you want to let them know that they're striving towards they're getting there. They're not there yet, but they're getting there. And they just got to put a few of these other things in place and they'll be there. Right. And so it's that constant encouragement that you want to give that drives, like you're saying, Roscoe, that motivation to be better, to improve, to get better at the task at hand.
I saw this a lot in the youth and high school football coaching, where a running back or a receiver would fumble the ball and other team recovers it. And that running back or receiver comes over to the sideline and the coach just goes over there and chews him a new one,
right.
But you know what? You don't see that a lot at the college and NFL levels, and this is why. Because there's not a running back or receiver on the planet that doesn't know that fumbling the ball is bad.
Right.
Like, you're going over there and chewing his ass is not helping the matter.
No.
Going over there and saying, hey, dude, check this out. There's a reason that I tell you I need 4 points of contact on the football when you're running it, right? So remember that next time I give you the ball, 4 points of contact at all times, and you won't fumble the ball anymore. He already feels bad enough. Yeah. He knows he screwed up. Chewing his ass isn't going to help the matter.
No, I mean,
right? Go and coach the guy up. Give him some feedback. Remind him of the fundamentals that maybe he lapsed on in that moment.
It's headspace, right? Like, so if you want to use a football analogy, how many when a kicker misses a field goal, do you see everybody run up to him and push him and be like, dude, you fucking suck?
No,
dude.
They all come up. Hey, dude, we'll get the next one.
High-five him. They smack him on the ass. They go, you'll get the next one. Everybody leaves that dude the fuck alone, right? Because they all know that there's a mental aspect to this game, right? And if he comes off on the sideline and everybody's down on him, well, guess what? With 4 seconds left in the fourth quarter and he's got to do it again, what's he going to be thinking about? He's going to be thinking about, fuck, man, I just missed the last one and everybody hates me for it. And he's going to be putting all this extra pressure on himself that's going to affect his performance, right? So we don't want to do those things, right?
Yeah. Well, kickers are fucking aliens anyway,
you want to build
those guys are like cold-blooded assassins, man.
It's the same thing. Your quarterback throws an interception. When he comes to the sideline, you going to rip his head off? No, because he already knows he screwed up.
No.
And all you're going to do is make him go out there and then be timid about throwing the ball when you need him to chuck it across the yard, and be confident in the decisions that he's making, and not hesitate to where that throw gets there too late, or it ends up in an interception, or he's getting receivers killed over the middle because that second of hesitation led to, the safety reading his eyes, and now he's on him at the time the ball gets there. So, like, all those things go into it.
Yeah. No, you see that a lot at the upper levels. Man, they put the quarterback right back on the field.
Yeah.
Hey, man, you're throwing the ball. Yeah. Like, we're not going to play the rest of the game and not throw it. So here's a couple of dink and dunks to get your confidence back, and we're going, man. Take a shot. So you're right, man. I think I think when the guy's having a bad day, you got a student that had a bad day. Try to highlight right off the bat. Try to highlight a couple of things, like, and it could be something as simple as, "Hey, man, that was a really bad sortie, but guess what? We hit all the targets. Number 4 dies, and something. All this other bad stuff happened, but we hit the targets, and that was one of our goals for today. So let's focus on something good." Or right out of the
it
game.
Could be something even simpler, right? It can be, yeah, dude, we didn't hit the targets today, but your formation was awesome. You didn't go blind. You were always where I expected you to be. You screwed the mech up at the end game when it really mattered, but we can debrief to that and we can fix that for the next time. So it can even
we don't fly visual formation anymore.
I know,
just
but I'm just saying you can even, my point in that is though, is it can be small things, like the value that they added to the team and the execution of what the task was, are the things that you want to highlight, even if it didn't go exactly the way that you wanted it to or needed it to. And then you highlight the deficiency, and then you talk about how they fix the deficiency.
Yeah. Well, you step back and you take a 30,000 foot view of it. And what's the aggregate? Well, the aggregate is a whole bunch of those little things put together over a long period of time.
Exactly.
Right. So, okay, today your formation was great. Tomorrow we're going to work on one other thing. Like I want you to, match me turn for turn in the cap. And so that you're not running out of gas in the middle of the push.
Yeah.
It's those little things that if you can do that over a 6 to 9 month course, then you're going to graduate and you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
A person who's, in a regular civilian work environment, identify a few of those things. Ask your boss for feedback on things that you can work on. Make a list and start knocking them off, man. Today I'm going to practice this, or this week I'm going to really practice on this. I'm not going to fucking take a sticky note or a Sharpie, write it on your palm. I'm not going to say fuck in the morning meeting today. And if you can do that for a week or two, maybe that becomes habit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a little stuff.
It is. Yeah. The little things add up.
Yeah. So big takeaways, receiving feedback, have something to write with, have a little humility, ask questions.
Yep.
That's kind of where I would sum that one up.
Ask questions if you need to, get your ego out of the way, ask clarifying statements, and then be honest with yourself. Have a little self-inspection and figure out if it's applicable. And if it is, come up with a game plan on how to address it.
Yep. And then if you're the person giving the feedback, try not to be an asshole about it. You can be direct, but you don't have to be mean.
No.
Right? So you can be critical, but you don't have to be mean. Have the evidence to support it, and always give the next step. Like give the instruction to get them to the expectation. If the level is here and they're not meeting it, tell them how they get there. Right? And then the ball's in their court. Let them go perform.
Put them in play. Be empathetic in your delivery. Focus on those I statements, not the you statements. Be genuine and authentic in what you're trying to tell them. Provide concrete examples on what you're talking about that needs to be fixed. And then, don't be afraid to talk about what they're doing well, what they need to address, and then how to fix it. And make them aware of the resources that they may not know are available to them to help them get better. And then follow up. You got to follow up, man. That's the other piece of it that I think a lot of people aren't very great at, is follow up.
I think that applies to both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. It does, right? We talked about that the other way too.
Yeah.
So follow up.
Yeah. I think asking those questions and following up, that's a good way to close that loop.
Yep.
Cool, man. What else you got other than don't wear V-neck t-shirts?
That's all I got, man.
All right. Well, be the change.
Be the one.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.be1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at Be1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.